Hey guys, how's it going? It's Dilmer again and welcome back to my channel. So first of all, thank you very much for joining the channel. I really appreciate your time. And today I'm pretty excited because I'm actually going to continue the videos about creating shaders. This time around, I was thinking of coming up with an idea. What can I do that I haven't done before? And that is I need to expose properties through a shader that I can access through a UI. So in order for me to do that, I need to expose properties, and now I need to be able to access them through a script. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to be adding some sliders on the UI piece, and then basically as I move some of those sliders, we're going to be sending that information to the shader. The shader is going to capture that information and then make the modification. So let's actually jump into Unity and start working on it. Alright guys, so this is a scene that I created last time where we went through the Unity LWRP essentials, which is basically the lightweight rendering pipeline essentials. So what I want to do in these videos is instead of controlling the parameters for these shaders through the inspector, I want to add a UI component. So to add a UI component that can take parameters and send them to the shaders, that's basically the whole core and the whole reason of this video. So I'm going to hit play and I want to show you how I can change those through the inspector so that we can replicate that same behavior through the UI that I'm going to be creating. So if I change the time speed, you can see that that's changing the speed of the deformation. If I go all the way up, it's going to be very fast. And also if I go to the noise scale, you can kind of see that we're kind of getting more of a jelly-like shape, which actually looks really cool. And if I make it faster, you can see how that is affecting. So the UI is only going to have these two properties, the time speed and noise scale. I will add another video where we'll focus on adding color, but that will require that we add a color picker in this area. So I'll do that in another video because that's going to take a little more time. So perfect, I think we're good to go. So instead of changing this scene and making changes to the shaders here, what I'm going to have you do is create a new scene. So we're going to duplicate shader underscore 2. And that's going to create shader underscore 4. So I'm just going to double click on that. And yes, I don't want to save the changes on this scene. And the other thing that I want to do is I don't want to be changing, the properties on all these three. I just want to change the properties on one because that's going to show you the changes that we're going to be making. So I'm just going to go to scene and we're just going to select the sphere 2 and a sphere 3 and then delete them. And we're just going to focus on this one right here. The other change that I want to make is let's just offset the camera on X a tiny bit more so that it is in the center. And we can probably just do -1. I think that's perfect. And then let's rename this sphere underscore 1 to just a sphere since we're just going to have the 1. Perfect. Then the other thing that I want to do is I don't want to modify this material because it's going to modify the material in our shader underscore 2 scene. So let's create a new material for that. And if we look at the material that we have associated, it's going to be shader underscore 2 underscore 1. So I'm going to duplicate that material. And then I'm just going to call it shader underscore 4. And then what we're going to be doing is dragging and dropping that shader to the sphere object. And now if we click on it, we should see shader underscore 4 associated with it, which is great. So now any changes that we make on this one, it won't affect the other ones. So that's perfect. So now what do we do? So the next thing that I want to do is I want to add the UI components that are going to allow us to send or changes to these properties. So to do that, right click on the hierarchy on any, the empty area, and then click on the UI, and we're going to add a slider. And that slider by default is going to show on the bottom left. So we're going to change that. To change that, click on the slider, then click on this area right here, and this is going to allow us to change the anchors. With the anchors, we can change the top right, which is what I'm going to do. And then the other thing that I'll do is I'll just set X and Y position to 0 so that it can be right on the top. Then what I can do is just basically by dragging that value, I can modify the position. And we can do something like, you can probably put it right there, that's fine. Let's do -850, and then we can go down about -150. That's perfect. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate, basically double the width. So I'm going to say 320, and I think the height is okay. Yeah, that's fine for now. So then the other thing that I'm going to do in the canvas, I'm going to right click on the canvas and then go to UI and then select text. So we're going to drag and drop that text into the slider, and the reason why I want to do that is because I want to show people what this slider is going to be for. Just like the sphere material has, it has a slider and basically a label. We're going to do the same thing with the control that we're creating, which is perfect. And let me go to the scene view, change these to 2D, and then hit F so that we can focus on that component. So we can see that we're way off on the, the location of that component. So I'm going to do exactly what we did on the other one. I'm just going to say, the top right, and then do 0, 0, and that's going to show on the top right of that component, because this is going to be basically it's a child of a slider. Now we can just basically move it around. I'm just going to put it right there, right on the corner. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is this one is going to be the time scale. So let's just change the label to time scale. And not only I'm going to have time scale, but I'm also going to basically show the value. So as the slider is changing, I want that value to change to reflect that. So by default, I'm just going to put a 0. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to change the color. I'm just going to say, let's do white and see how that looks. I think that works well with this background. So we'll just do white. And then the font size, I want it to be much larger. So I'm just going to set it to 30 and then resize the boundaries so that we can see it all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap it to the right. You can see as I move this, it's basically snapping. And then the same thing with this one, make sure that it snaps to that same. So everything is perfectly aligned, and it just makes things much cleaner when it comes to modifying that UI. So that's our first UI component. And in fact, we could make it, because I think it's too big, about 25. It's perfect. And then instead of calling this text on the text scheme object, I'm just going to call it label. So we're going to have a slider, a label, and then everything else is going to be default. So if we go back to our sphere, we have a time speed, right? So if we go back to the label, this should actually be called time speed instead of time scale. If we go back to the sphere, we're also going to have a noise scale, so that's going to be another slider. But let's just finish this one up so that we have. So then this one, we're going to call it time speed slider, just like our label has. So time speed is going to match that. Then now we should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that as well. And if we go back to the sphere, remember we have a noise scale. So this one is going to be noise scale slider. Perfect. And we're also going to be making changes to the label. So this one is going to be noise scale. And you'll notice that they're overlapping right now. So we just need to reposition everything. So I'm just going to move it to the right. And we should have time and speed and then noise scale. Excellent. So we have these two. So the other thing that I normally like to do, I like UIs to have, some kind of a grouping. So if I click on the canvas, I'm going to go into UI and then panel. And that panel doesn't really need to be, these don't need to be a child of panel. I just like to have it for visualization. So what I'm going to be doing here is instead of resizing and stretching, just like this is saying, I'm just going to change the size. And that size is going to basically align with our other components so that we have them grouped in that area. It just looks easier, better whenever you're looking at, a screen and you can see, okay, those are the UI components. So that's perfect. Then the other thing that I want to do here is let's change the color to something like, let's do black. And I think that works. That works perfectly. And then let's move it down a tiny bit. And then we can scale it down a tiny bit more. And something like that works perfect. And then the other thing that I want you to do is once we have, let's name this one overlay, because that's basically what it is an overlay. And then make sure that the raycast target is disabled, because I don't want to raycast to that object. I want to raycast to these controls. Otherwise, we won't be able to change the slider. Okay, so that works perfect. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy a label. You can also create a new one. But since we already created them, I'm just going to copy one and put it right on the top. And then offset it a tiny bit. And this is going to be the title of basically our UI. So this one we're going to call shader parameters. Perfect. And we can go and zoom in, and I'm just going to move it down a tiny bit. And we can even just resize this and make sure that we are basically snapping to the corner. Excellent. And I think everything looks good. I can resize this. I am very picky when it comes to UI, so, and I'm sure you are as well. And even though this is not going to be, you know, something that we ship right now, I think it's always good to have nice UI. And the other thing that I'll do is let's change this to 20. I think that it's perfect. And let's offset it. Instead of snapping to the corner, let's just offset it a little bit. There we go. Something like that. I'm going to change the alignment to have vertical alignment. Perfect. And we can go in. And I'm also going to change the color a tiny bit. There we go. I don't think that's as important as these controls. These controls are more important. So when it comes to UI, I want people to pay attention more to these than it is to the header. Okay, so we're good with the UI. Everything looks good there. So now what I want you to do is go into shaders. And if you remember, if we go into the shader that we have, go into a sphere, this has the shader underscore 2 associated already. So if we go to shader underscore 2, there's a couple of things that we need to make sure that we have set. If we haven't set them yet, then we need to make sure they are set. And those are the variables. So if I expand this variable, let me just resize this window. And basically, whenever you need to access these variables through code, you don't use the variable name, you use the reference name. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the reference name, and then replace the reference name. And let's paste it there. And you can notice that it actually added an underscore. By default, it's not going to allow you to have the same name. So the reference name is by standards of what I use, is I basically use the same name and then with the underscore as a prefix. So we're going to do that with every single one of these. So I'm just going to do this one as well. This one is going to be noise scale, and we'll just replace the reference. Hit save. It's going to change another prefix, and the color we don't need to worry about it because we're not going to do that right now. We could actually just do it, and then we can have it. It's ready for the next video. So I'll just do it on all of them. Okay, excellent. So we already have a slider that goes from 0 to 10 on the inspector. So the time speed goes from 0 to 10, and then the noise scale goes from 0 to 100. So now let's go into our component. So I'm going to hit save to those changes. So the shader graph has those changes. Don't worry about what you're seeing right now, because that's basically because we set them to 0, is resetting back to 0. So what I got to do right now is on the canvas, we want to go to the slider, and the time speed is going to go from 0 to 10, and then the noise scale is going to go from 0 to 100. Let's just verify that one more time just to make sure that I didn't miss the right value. So time speed is 0 to 10, and then noise scale, it's going to be 0 to 100, which is excellent. So that matches what we just did. So let's just close it up. Perfect. So now how do we pass that information to Unity and to the shader from Unity? So what we need to do is I'm going to add a new UI component on the canvas. And this is basically what's going to allow us to hook that together. So you're going to click on Add Component, and we're going to create a new script. And this is going to be, we can call this UI Manager. I think that's a good name for this. And perfect. Now what we're going to do is just double click on the UI Manager to open our code editor. Excellent. So I'm not going to need the star method, so I'm just going to remove it. And then we're going to focus on adding a couple of variables. So I'm going to need to store the slider for the time speed variable. So if we go back here, we need to store the time speed slider as a variable. We also need to store the noise scale slider as a variable. So I'm just going to copy this name, and then we can go back here and I can just say slider, no slider join, slider, and then yeah, that works. So we need to add a using statement, which is going to be Unity engine UI. Excellent. And that's going to bring the slider. And then this is going to be time speed slider. And then we can just say null by default. And then we're just going to serialize it. We're also going to do the same thing with the other one, which was the noise scale. And it's also going to be initialized to null. We're also going to need the labels themselves because we're gonna have to modify the label value. So what I can do is I'm just going to copy this entirely, and instead of calling a slider, it's just going to be a text field, and we can just say time speed slider label, and we just copy that and then basically paste it below the other noise scale slider, and we just change the name. Okay, perfect. So that's all as far as what we're gonna need to hook. For now, if we add more properties later, such as the color, we can add those ones as well. Excellent. So now that we have that hooked together, how do we actually send that information to, to the shader? So we're gonna need another variable that is gonna be the material, because right now we don't have the material set anywhere, and that's how you access the properties of the shaders. So we're gonna need to add a new variable, and this one's gonna be material. And the material that we have is basically a deformation material, so we can just say deformation material, and we can just set it to null as well. And I'm just gonna copy that attribute, just save us some time. Perfect. So we have that going, and on the update, what I'm gonna do, just for sanity check, just on the material, we can just say as long as the deformation material is not null, meaning that we set it. And we could do these either on the start or on the update. I'm gonna do it in the update for now. Okay, so now we can do deformation material and then set flow. And if you remember, we have something called reference names, and one was called time speed, and it takes a value. So the value that I'm gonna do for the time speed is gonna be the time speed slider value. So we're just gonna do time speed slider value. Then I'm gonna duplicate that one more time, and this one is gonna be for the next one, which is gonna be the noise scale, and we're also gonna take the slider value for the noise scale, which is gonna be noise scale slider that value. Perfect. So now we need to also display that information. So for that, I'm gonna use the labels. So on the label, I'm just gonna say text. And then I'm going to use a string interpolation to format it. And then in the string interpolation, I'm gonna type in time speed, column, and then my curly brace, and then the value of my slider. Excellent. So I'm just gonna duplicate that whole thing one more time. And this one is gonna be the other label, which is gonna be the noise one. We want to use the right slider value, and this is gonna change as well to noise scale. Excellent. So we can put comments in here. This is time speed, type variables, or methods per se, and then we can say on this one noise scale, and we can just say time speed instead of that. Perfect. And as we add more, we can keep adding to this list. Excellent. So now we have, so what we did is we're saying, okay, on the deformation material, I'm going to change the flow value for the reference variable or property called time speed. And this is the value that I want to pass in. Then I want to update the label, the time speed slider label text to reflect those changes. And the same thing with the other property on the noise scale. I want to modify basically the shader property to have the value of the slider and then reflect the changes on the other label. So that is everything that we need to do on the UIP. So let's go back into Unity, and there's a couple of things that I want to change as well, and we'll change them as we go. So we now need to do the connections right now. If we click on the canvas, let me collapse the transform and also the raycaster. If we collapse it, we don't have anything associated, so let's associate everything. So the first one that I need to associate is the time speed slider. I'm going to drag it and drop it there, and also the noise scale slider. Drag it and drop it there. Now let's just do the labels. So I'm going to expand those two, go back to my script. So the time speed slider is going to associate with that one, and then the noise, basically the label inside of the noise scale slider, is going to be associated with that one as well. So now the last thing that we'll need to associate is the material, which is going to be our shader_4, and we should be good to go. If everything works, we should be able to control the shader. Now let's click on play and see what happens. So we don't see anything, and that's a good sign. That means that these are basically working. So now if I change the slider, if we change the noise, so we can start to see some changes. So I like it and not like it that much because, let's see, by default we shouldn't have to, you know, I don't want to see an empty screen. So what I'm gonna do is I want to see maybe something like that. I want to get some default values in place. And the other thing that we have, so remember that number, 0.62 and 10. It's a good start. So the first thing that I want to do is I have a rotator associated with this. This is a script that I wrote to rotate any type of game object. So I'm just going to set all of its values to 0. And then on the time, speed, and noise scale default on the slider, I want to change some of those settings. So we remember we go from 0 to 10 here. So we also can have a default value by just putting, you know, maybe we just do 0.7 in that one. And then on the noise scale slider, if we go to the value, we can go to something like 10. So that way, you know, when this initializes, those are the default values. And then that also reflects the default values, you know, how the shape is going to look. So now if I hit play, you should see, you know, that looks a lot better. And now I can change the time speed. I can change some of those settings. So that's really cool. So I can make a change on the noise. How about we also make some changes on the camera? So let's go to the camera, and I want this to be much bigger because this is basically the focus point. I'm gonna change the position and do something like -1.15 on X on the camera, and then I think let's do 1.7. I think that works perfectly. And we can resize this a little bit. And perfect. Let's go and hit play. And that's looking really good. Now if I change, there we go. So everything is changing. As in fact, if you go to shader_4 and you make some of these changes, you'll see that the shader itself, the material, is changing its properties. So it's sending those property values in real time, which is really, really cool because we're doing this through the UI. The reason for doing this, if you want to have something like this in your game, let's say you may want to have a visual effect or something that you show through a user, you can provide this information to the user and they can make a change in real time. This is the reason why I'm doing this, because I want to make something that uses this quite a bit, and I can have the user, you know, the player, make some changes to those in real time. So we can get some really cool changes. So if we want more of a round shape, we can go and then change the scale. It's looking more like jelly. Yeah, it looks cool. Let's go back and increment the noise. I think something like that works. Yeah, I think that works really well. So that's everything that I wanted to show you guys. I'll be pushing this through, you know, to the repository that is in the description of this video, which is going to be in GitHub. So if you guys have any comments or questions, let me know through the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video. Thank you guys.